All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We are going to trace a massive, century-spanning chain reaction to show exactly how a single, seemingly trivial wrong turn in 1914 created the incredibly complex world we live in today. It's a truly fascinating look at the domino effect of history, taking us all the way from a tiny spark in a European city straight to the future of our global order.
You can almost feel the heavy weight of that exact moment. British Foreign Minister Sir Edward Grey famously lamented on the eve of World War I that an entire era was ending. And what's just absolutely wild to think about is that this catastrophic shift, this global earthquake, was all sparked by a minor navigational error in Sarajevo.
To understand this whole shebang, we actually have to start incredibly small. Picture this. June 28, 1914. A driver taking the Austro-Hungarian heir Archduke Franz Ferdinand through Sarajevo makes a wrong turn. Realizing the mistake, the driver tries to reverse, but the car's engine stalls. In that brief, agonizing pause, a young assassin named Gavrilo Princip steps right up and fires the fatal shots. A stalled engine and a single pistol shot. That's literally all it took to change the world forever.
Think about the sheer, terrifying speed of this escalation. Day 1 is the assassination. Fast forward to day 25, Austria issues this incredibly harsh ultimatum to Serbia. By day 30, Austria-Hungary officially declares war. And then by day 37, Britain declares war on Germany. We transformed a localized political assassination into a total global catastrophe in just over a single month.
Now you might be wondering, why couldn't the leaders just hit the brakes once the crisis began? Well, that brings us to historian A.J.P. Taylor's famous war by timetable theory. At the time, all the great powers relied on massive conscript armies that had to be moved by railway. Once those trains started rolling to mobilize millions of men according to these rigid, down-to-the-minute schedules, you couldn't just hit pause or reroute them. Diplomatic solutions became physically impossible, and the mechanical, industrial machinery of war just totally took over.
Section 1. A flawed peace. The Treaty of Versailles. So when the guns finally go silent in 1919, what followed was, well, deeply flawed, and historians are still fiercely debating its true impact today. On one hand, you have economist John Maynard Keynes arguing it was a brutal Carthaginian peace, basically a settlement designed to economically strangle Germany with astronomical, impossible-to-pay reparations. But on the other side, historian Sally Marks suggests it was actually a pretty moderate settlement. She points out that the actual reparations were much lower in reality, peaking at just 2.4% of Germany's GDP, and argues that the treaty only failed because the Allies lacked the political willpower to actually enforce it.
But regardless of which academic theory you lean towards, the reality on the ground for everyday citizens, absolutely devastating. Get a load of this number, $4.2 trillion. The economic reality was so bad that citizens were literally using wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a single loaf of bread. Whether it was caused by the crushing burden of reparations or deliberate currency printing by the German government to avoid paying them, the visceral punch of the Weimar Republic's hyperinflation is just staggering. By November 1923, one single US dollar equated to 4.2 trillion German marks. The currency was completely wiped out.
Which brings us to Section 2. Rise of the Dictators. Trauma and Extremism.
That profound economic devastation and national humiliation we just talked about, it paved a direct, step-by-step path pushing desperate populations toward authoritarian extremes. The unresolved trauma and monetary instability of the interwar period created this very clear ladder for totalitarian leaders to climb. Step 1, you have total economic collapse and hyperinflation. Step 2, this inevitably leads to widespread political instability, deep anger, and violent revolts in the streets, which sets up Step 3. Exhausted, desperate populations become totally willing to listen to militaristic dictators who are offering absolute extreme solutions to restore order and national pride.
You can see how this volatile peace directly birthed these totalitarian movements across the board. In Germany, Hitler channels that bitter anti-Versailles anger into the rise of Nazism. Over in Italy, Mussolini's fascism seeks to restore the ancient glory of Rome. Japan's militarists start invading their neighbors just to secure essential raw materials for their battered economy. And in the Soviet Union, Stalin consolidates absolute power through the brutal Great Purge. The board is now set for an even greater conflagration.
Moving on to Section 3, Empires Fall, Nations Rise, focusing on the post-W2 order.
The devastation of World War II completely shattered the old Eurocentric global order. Centuries-old empires fall and new nations rise. To put this into perspective, think about the UK's public sector debt. Before World War I, it was hovering around a very manageable 30% of its GDP. After World War I, it shoots up to 170%, and after World War II, a staggering 250%. Great Britain emerged from the Second World War victorious, sure, but completely bankrupt, leaving them economically unable to afford the massive, sprawling costs of colonial rule.
Maintaining armies and administrators halfway across the world, it just wasn't feasible anymore. This triggered a massive, rapid wave of global decolonization. The catalysts were undeniable. You had European economic bankruptcy from the Total War, post-war treaties that literally forced Axis powers like Japan to forfeit their colonies, the unstoppable momentum of long-standing independence movements, and finally, a weakened Europe that now had to rely economically and militarily on a strongly anti-colonial United States.
And from the ashes of those fallen empires, boom, two new global superpowers emerge to divide the globe. On one side, a US-dominated sphere promoting capitalism and democracy. On the other, a Soviet-dominated sphere promoting communism. The Cold War divide was drawn, setting the geopolitical stage for the next half-century of proxy wars and nuclear tension.
That sets the stage for Section 4, the future world order and the echoes of Sarajevo.
So the victorious powers of World War II look back at the absolute chaos of the previous decades and realize, okay, we need a totally new multilateral architecture here. They built these very institutions to prevent a recurrence of global conflict and to maintain economic stability. The United Nations was formed as a forum for global diplomacy and conflict prevention, NATO was established as a permanent Western military alliance, and the Bretton Woods system was created to stabilize global finance and trade.
If there's one crucial takeaway from this entire explainer, it's this. The modern world as we know it was literally forged in seconds by a single trembling hand. Our modern borders, our international laws, our economic dependencies, and our vital security alliances, they are all the direct ripples of a stalled engine and an assassin's pistol back in 1914. It is the ultimate butterfly effect.
As we try to predict where this giant domino chain is going to lead us next in the future, I want to leave you with a pretty provocative question to ponder. If our global stability is built on the ashes of these historical accidents, what actually happens to the world order when the memory of those catastrophes fades? Will the institutions designed to protect us hold fast, or are we unknowingly setting up the next domino to fall? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.